Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 53. This chapter is titled Darkness. And I love how Kagurabachi sort of started off like really edgy, right? Like, I'm Chihiro Rokuhira, I'm gonna go and kill my father's assassins, the Hishaku bastards, and take them down with me, right? And then, of course, as the series has progressed, we've sort of seen Chihiro mellow out a little bit. While he still has this rage and vengeance, it doesn't quite show as much in the later chapters after, of course, characters like Haruki are introduced, like Hiyuki, Tafuku, Shiba, and like Char, and all of those various characters. He now also is like to name Chihiro's main like ally group. And once all of these characters are introduced, the series sort of more takes on a role of, all right, yes, all of this stuff is going on, and we still have big things going on. I mean, the Rakuzachi, where, of course, the Magatsumi Enchanted Blade is going on. Like, there's a lot of big stuff going on that affects the outcome of this story, but the series sort of mellows down a little bit. And I really love how this chapter of Kagurabachi takes that to a whole new note, because this chapter really reintroduces Chihiro's motivation and his goals for the entire series, really showing why he is a hero and how he is willing to achieve his goals. It is really super interesting in the general context of the series, sorry if I could talk, that we get here in this chapter. And like I said, this chapter reintroduces that edginess into Chihiro's character and really lives up to the name of the chapter title, Darkness, like 110%. I do need to quickly mention that this chapter is a few weeks old at the recording of this video. I have just gotten very behind with not only college, but also just a lot of other life-related deals, so sorry about that. But the reason I want to mention that is that at this point we do have a Kagurabachi color page, a double-page spread. So Kagurabachi had the cover of Weekly Shonen Jump this past week, and Kagurabachi has had a second cover, at least if I'm not mistaken. Let me quickly go through and open up my files real quick. I may just be off, I don't know. I think I may just be off. Okay, my bad. This was the second one I was thinking of. The last one was a few chapters ago, about 10 chapters ago. Or a few, my bad. I may cut that out. Actually, I won't, because it shows to you how I'm not a perfect reviewer. Look at that. But, yes, did all of that say, yes, this chapter has a double-page color page in it. It's got 3 color pages. That's what all I mean to say. But and these color pages are very nice. We'll get into them whenever we start talking about the chapter. But of course, to start talking about the chapter, we need to talk about what happened last time in Kagurabachi. And last time we had a chapter that was really all about Hirohiko sort of trying to coax Chihiro into joining them or working together. Pretty much Hirohiko saying like, hey, me and you both know how to kill. We've done it since a young age. And here's the thing, bro. Me and you, we could be friends, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, we're both 18, we're both very similar. Hirohiko went into a play called the Battle of Sano Island, pretty much took a seat, and eventually, using her paper powers, pretty much led all of the Hishaku Dainseki sorcerers, and of course Chihiro, to this playhouse, and they crashed into the theater, I guess. They crashed through the ceiling, and then the very end of the chapter was pretty much Chihiro causing a massive amount of blood all around the people of the audience, and pretty much Hirohiko just said like, hey, you feel it too, like to the average person, you are just a monster, but I'm the only one who can understand you. And the end of the last chapter was a really awesome moment of Chihiro just going like, hey, cut the BS. And that's where we ended last chapter, and it really is where we start this chapter. It's not where we start this chapter. Let me totally rephrase that, because I forgot the first flashback happens. But to get into this chapter, like I said, we've got a few color pages here. The first color page is pretty much just Hirohiko sitting in the theater chair, and Chihiro standing up on the stage with his sword in his hand and the blood splattering his face. And we also see Hirohiko, they have a little bit of a pinkish hair to him, and some blood is just like crawling down for their face too. It's a very interesting visual there. And then the full 2-page color spread we get is, of course, we see Samura here. He is, we got a sword in his hand. We see Aruha, who has a sword in his hand. I don't know if these are the actual designs of both the Kumeyori and the Tobimune blade. We know that they are probably similar, but we don't exactly know what these swords look like, if I'm not mistaken. By that I mean we don't know what the hilts look like, so yeah. And then the color page on the inside of it, we see a bunch of Hirohiko's paper cranes all folded up and completely blood red. And then we see that Chihiro and Hirohiko are sort of standing and looking at each other. They're very much the same height. And Chihiro has his blade resting right above Hirohiko's neck. It's a very interesting visual through and through, and I really do like it. But to get into the chapter itself, we start off in a little bit of a flashback. And this flashback is a flashback that we saw a few chapters ago, mainly at the end of chapter 50 and sort of the beginning of chapter 52. But it's the flashback where we see Samura, a very young Chihiro, and Shiba all hanging out together. And pretty much what had happened last time in this flashback was we saw that Samura was pretty much teaching Chihiro how to cut through the straw pylons in a straight and very easy line, because pretty much Chihiro the first time went to cut through it, he sort of got held up with his blade and didn't make it all the way through. Samura then shows him, and as we get into the visuals here, we pretty much see Samura's like, oh, hey, that's pretty good, Chihiro, and just after watching me once. As we see these straw pylons are cut at that perfect diagonal angle, and we see that Chihiro's holding the blade, is that he cut them in this very good way, right? Shiba in the background pretty much says like, hey, yeah, Chihiro is the Rokuhira eyes, which pretty much just means like he'll learn swordsmanship real quick. So pretty interesting little thing there is that like, oh, hey, that's an interesting way to phrase that. He's got the Rokuhira eyes, so like he's good at looking at swords and understanding them, I guess. A little bit of an interesting deal there. But Samura just says like, hey, he's still way too young for this, as a young Chihiro is just like, oh, the swordsmanship of a hero. But Samura just comes over and pretty much pokes Chihiro in both of his eyes, and Chihiro sort of winces in pain a little bit from this, and she was like, hey, what did you do that for? And Samura just says like, hey, I sort of sensed that he was glazing at me in admiration. Swinging a sword in a real battle isn't really that great. You're cutting people, not straw. And Samura just says like, hey, don't worry, Chihiro's smart. You just don't need to get starry-eyed, kid. We killed tons of people. Yeah, Samura just sort of explains here like, yeah, we did a lot of really bad things in the war and things that shouldn't really be praised by the masses. And to see a young child sort of admiring me for all of the people I killed, I can totally understand the aspect that Samura is coming from here of like, yeah, don't idealize us. We're not that good. But at this point, we cut back to the crowd inside of the theater where, of course, the Battle of Sano Island play is going on. And we see all of the audience members are very freaked out. Like, they're running away. Their faces are like, oh, no, I don't like this. And we see Chihiro is just standing there looking at Hirohiko. And Hirohiko we sort of understand this is the same thing that Hirohiko says. We're like, hey, I'm the only one who can understand you. We could be friends, Chihiro. Just think about it. And Chihiro just says like, hey, what are you talking about? Do you want to kill me or not? And Hirohiko's like, hey, well, let's see. I do want to kill you, but at the same time, I also want to be your friend. I think maybe we can become friends by trying to kill each other. I've never really had a friend before, so I don't know, but I think that's sort of right. I think that that's how we become friends. And Hirohiko's like sitting very casually in her chair while saying all of this, and eventually Chihiro's like, hey, that makes no sense, and he lunges forward the Inten enchanted blade in his hand, and lunges forward at Hirohiko, as Hirohiko once again puts her hand together in like a praying motion, and then opens them back up, and a ton of paper swells out from in between his hands and sort of envelops a good portion of the area around Chihiro, right? And Chihiro just says like, hey Hirohiko, all you know how to do is just run away, right? And Hirohiko makes the various like obvious excuses like, hey, you have an enchanted blade, and unprotected close combat would mean suicide for me. And besides, I have to use whatever I can. As we see, as all of this is happening, all of the papers are surrounding Chihiro, and Chihiro's like, damn it, like, so much papers around here. Hirohiko has completely covered themselves. As all of this is going on, and all of a sudden, Chihiro hears a noise behind him. And as he goes and turns the blade towards something, he sees it's one of the audience members who is standing here, who's pretty much gotten drawn in with all of this paper, right? As we understand that this is Hirohiko's plan, is to use all of these people to lure Chihiro and make Chihiro even more of a monster in this instant, right? As Chihiro finally is able to look around him, and he sees a bunch of people just being drawn and moved around by all of the paper around him. And we see about 4 people just who's being drug around by this paper. And Cheers is like, damn it, the audience member's like, where is he? Where's Hirohiko, right? And he's like, damn it, I know he can detect my location with all of the paper. He stays hidden and attacks with all of his paper cranes. Like, those cranes, they're strong enough to slash through a body. A direct hit would be lethal. As Hirohiko sort of just is standing there and says, oh, Chihiro, are you paralyzed yet? As we see that Hirohiko does his things, closed her hands, and spreads them out once again. But this time what forms are a bunch of papers that are starting to self-autonomously fold into paper cranes, right? And Hirohiko just thinks like, hey, perhaps your power to absorb doesn't apply to only physical objects. The fact that you don't use it is my only answer. If you use a Kuro, you could clear the paper to see you better, but you might also hurt a lot of innocent bystanders. You could also use Nishiki to move quickly, but the cranes crashing into you would hurt all of the innocents. So will you just hold your ground and focus on defending yourself with other people around? You have to be very careful with that sword. You're doomed by a death by 1,000 cuts. There is no way out. As Hirohiko's thinking all of this, they eventually just say like, hey, don't worry, they'll show you the way though. As we see the paper drags one of these audience members towards Chihiro and pretty much bumps in the back of Chihiro's body, as the guy's like, stay away, I don't want to die, I don't want to do all this, right? As Chihiro just thinks again to like, hey, to the average person, you're just a monster. As we get a little bit of narration from Hirohiko's perspective saying like, hey, in the play that was interrupted, there's a scene where the enemy takes a lot of hostages, and the hero Sasuke is paralyzed and the enemy gets away. But Sasuke is garbage. You can't worry about a hostage or two. In real life, you would just be dead. You're a killer, but at the moment of truth, you want to play the hero. If you weren't just a monster, Chihiro Rokuhira, I want this to resonate with you. You are one of us. As Hirohiko is just like saying this to himself like, hey, Chihiro, I want you to pretty much have to do whatever. You are a killer, and the moment of truth, yeah, you want to play this hero, but you are a monster. You will kill whoever you need to for your just goal at the end of the day. And at this point, Hirohiko just says out loud like, hey, Chihiro, who will you sacrifice? As he just says like, hey, come. Let's do a battle of the death, just you and me. As we see a bunch of the paper is just surrounding Chihiro. And in this moment, we see that Hirohiko is finally deciding to send off all of the paper cranes they have folded and are now sending off, right? As Hirohiko sees all this, we just see that Chihiro stands brilliantly still. As Hirohiko just thinks like, oh, so you're a Sasuke too, aren't you? Of course, saying that like Chihiro does not have that mental stability and that will to like, hey, I'm going to kill these people to ensure my survival and my goal. Chihiro's deciding not to do that. He is deciding to just stand there and be stoic, even if it means his life at the end of the day. All of these paper cranes come towards Chihiro, and we get this panel on page 15 where they completely rip through his body. We see that all of these sort of paper birds are just going through, and they're white before they go in, and as they come out of his body, they are all stained blood red. And Chihiro sees this, of course, the Nishiki clothing is all over his face pretty much, and yeah, he pretty much gets really, really messed up here, right? As we suddenly head back into the Samura flashback again, as Samura just says like, hey, the first time I cut a person, I couldn't stand to see the severed flesh. And that's the other reason I blinded myself. But that image is burned into my eyes. It never goes away. I could feel myself becoming a monster. And Chihiro's like, hey, but even so, you chose to wield an enchanted blade. That was to save everybody, wasn't it? And Samura just says like, hey, I mean, it was, but I had to keep falling through the darkness. And he says, but hey, that's not something to aspire to. I am going to hell. And Chihiro says like, well, how about this? Instead of admiring you, how about I just respect you instead? And Samura's like, hey, I mean, that's great. You are very welcome to do that. but he says, like, hey, you're not trying to become a swordsman anyway, right, Chihiro? And in this moment, we just see young Chihiro like, oh, yeah, right, but he doesn't finish his sentence in this moment, because, of course, at that point in his life, Chihiro did not have this motivation. His father wasn't killed. His whole world wasn't turned upside down yet. So in this moment, he had no reason or goal to become the murderer, to become a villain at the end of the day. He had no reason to pick up the sword. But of course, as we cut back to the present, we see Chihiro is standing there, all beaten up and bloodied, and we see all of the paper sort of just surrounding him in this instant, right? And Hirohiko sees this and is like, damn it, he's still standing. And Hirohiko just thinks to himself like, hey, damn it, with the fortification of Nishiki, he can increase his body's total resistance. But even so, as all of this happens, we just cut into Chihiro's mind as he just thinks like, hey, father and the sword bearers fought to protect others. They were definitely the heroes of their own stories. But they avoided that label because they felt the guilt for their total sins. That's all why they say the same thing. You'll find your own path different from mine. Don't choose hell like us. As Chihiro just thinks in this second like, hey, I'm sorry, but I'm going down the same path too. As all of a sudden Chihiro just calls out, Kuro. And we see the black goldfish in the black darkness just emanating out from around Chihiro. We see it's enveloping all of the paper around him. We see it envelops almost everything. As we suddenly see the panels go completely black. As the next scene we see Hirohiko is just standing around, not being able to tell what's going on here. As we see Chihiro is suddenly appeared behind Hirohiko, and all of a sudden, we see that Chihiro just goes down and swings his sword completely towards Hirohiko. And in this moment, we can't tell much of anything. I mean, it almost looks like Hirohiko's arm may have been cut off, but we also can being that the panel is done in almost complete darkness, we really can't tell much of what's going on in this instant besides for where we see Chihiro's eye is and where his sword is, and then where it seems to be Hirohiko's position. As Chihiro makes his attack and he sort of stands there silently again, as we cut to the next page, and we see that Hirohiko is just leaning in one of the theater chairs, and Chihiro is just right over him. One of his feet is on Hirohiko's soldier, and Chihiro just looks down at Hirohiko. We see all the members of the audience just looking around and over, and like, what is going on here? Like, this is crazy. What has happened? And in this moment, we see all of the paper seems to be floating down towards the ground as Hirohiko's power almost seems to be null and void at this point of being able to control all of this paper. As we now see that Chihiro's inten is stuck through Hirohiko's hand, and Hirohiko's like, damn it, what just happened? As Chihiro just says, hey, don't worry, I'm a sinner too. The first time I killed a person, I accepted that I'm a monster. The least I can do now, though, is refrain from causing harm to others and take you Hishaku bastards to hell with me. Now, talk. As we end off the chapter with Chihiro pretty much just going through and saying the sign of like, hey, I may not be the way that you view this Sasuke character. I may not want to harm others, but I am still a sinner, willing to do whatever it takes to reach my goal. And I love his line of like, hey, and take you Hishaku bastards to hell with me. It's a really, really cool line. And getting into like sort of the more final thoughts here, like what I really like about this chapter is how it sort of reaffirms Chihiro's motivation, because of course we've seen Chihiro sort of be like more of the straight man towards like all of his other companions who are more of the like, hey, I'm the funny guy and like I make all of the funny jokes. Like Haruki is like, he's a very entertaining character at the end of the day, right? So pretty much seeing that Chihiro, who's sort of been not in this role of like the very serious character, now getting back into this role of like, hey, I'm going to take you guys to hell with me. I know my path, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there. It's really, really cool to see Chihiro sort of step back down this path again in a way. And that's really what makes up this chapter at the very end of the day. I'd really like sort of cutting in interspersed more of these Samura flashbacks too, sort of seeing like, hey, here's how when Chihiro sort of learned more about the sword from Samura, And at the very end of the day, Samura's sort of coaxing of like, hey, don't become like the rest of us. We all feel that we are monsters and you should not aspire to be this. It's a very interesting way that Samura views life here, and one that I really like. And then eventually this moment where Chihiro does not harm all of the people, all of the paper cranes come flying through Chihiro's body, and next thing we know, he uses the Kuro ability and just shows how much he's willing to do everything. It is such an interesting image, of course, on pages 20 and 21, where we just see Chihiro is standing here, and then just like how everything's black, except for the few white splotches. They're like, right, we can see Inton, we can see their eyes, and we can barely see anything else. It's such an interesting panel for sure, and I just really, really like it. But yeah, after that, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter. Of course, this was chapter number 53, titled Darkness. A very good chapter through and through, and I definitely understand why Kagurabachi got the color page this week, because, man, out of everything in Weekly Shonen Jump, this was such a good chapter. Now, this wasn't the best chapter in Weekly Shonen Jump, but if you want to hear my theories on this, or not my theories, my ideas and what I thought about, of course, the issue of Shonen Jump that this came out in, I've got a video that very recently got put up on the channel, or it may not be up on the channel by the time I put this video up, but it will be the next video up one way or another. So yeah, that's pretty cool right there. But with all that being said, thank you guys so very much for watching. Good chapter of Kagurabachi. I do plenty of other anime and manga related content on the channel, so go check out all of those series if you are so inclined to. But yeah, with that, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter of Kagurabachi. Very, very good. But I will catch you guys next time for chapter number 54 of Kagurabachi. Again, this was chapter number 53, titled Darkness, and I'll catch you guys next time. This is Glowplasma 231, signing out.